Before time had a name, before gods ruled the skies, there was only chaos. From the clash of ice and fire, from the silence of the void, a world was born. This is the story of the Norse universe, forged through sacrifice, bound by fragile oaths, and destined to fall. Today, we journey to the very origins of the Scandinavian world. You will see how, from primordial chaos, ice and fire, a universe came into existence, a universe built upon a great sacrifice and the delicate agreements of the gods. We will trace the path from the rise of the Golden Asgard to the moment when true fear first settled within its halls. In this video, we will discover why Odin's order could not exist without Loki's deception, and how the birth of his monstrous children marked the beginning of the end. Ahead lies the story of Ragnarok, the final battle, where the old gods will vanish in flames to make way for a new dawn. This is a tale of how, from the ashes of a great catastrophe, silence is born, and with it, hope for a different future. Suggest new topics in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about history, from ancient legends to modern tales, from historical facts to mysterious plots. Make yourself comfortable. We begin. Before gods and humans, before all that we know today, there was nothing. No warm sun, no cool wind, no fertile land, and no deep blue sea. In those times, the very concepts of space and time did not yet exist. The universe was a bottomless abyss, known in ancient legends as Ginnungagap. A vast emptiness, without borders, without direction. There was no light, but neither was there the darkness we know. It was a state of absolute absence, silence before any sound was ever born. In this void, there was no memory of the past and no hint of the future. The world rested in a stillness that could not be measured in years, because years themselves had yet to begin. Yet, at the edges of this endless abyss, two primal forces began to emerge. In the north, Nymflame took shape, the realm of mist and ice. Eternal cold ruled there, and from its depths sprang the well Hvergelmir, giving birth to 11 poisonous rivers. These rivers flowed into the void, slowly freezing, turning into massive blocks of ice. Layer upon layer, the ice grew thicker, filling the northern reaches of Ginnungagap with harsh, motionless matter. In the south, a complete opposite arose. Muspelheim, the land of eternal fire and unbearable heat. Everything there glowed and sparkled, and the air itself trembled from the scorching flames. At the border of this fire already stood Surtir, the fire giant, gripping his blazing sword. Muspelheim was pure, untamed energy, striving to break free beyond its limits. The world did not begin by anyone's will. It formed naturally through the gradual convergence of these two extremes. There, in the center of the void, where the warm breath of the south met the icy cold of the north, a great melting began. Frost turned into drops of water, and within those drops the first life was born. From the mixture of poisonous ice and life-giving heat, a colossal being emerged, the giant Ymir. He became the first living creature in the empty universe. He was neither good nor evil, he was simply the embodiment of elemental chaos. There was no order in his body and no thought in his mind. He existed as a vast mass of flesh, nourished by the milk of the primordial cow Audhumla, who emerged from the same melting frost. While Ymir slept, sustained by the milky rivers of Audhumla, the gods, Odin, Vili, and they prepared a plan that would forever change the shape of reality. The age of primordial chaos was approaching its logical conclusion, the death of Ymir and the birth of the cosmos. By the time Odin, Vili, and Ve realized their power, the original world had fallen into stagnation. The first gods, born from the union of Bor and the giantess Bestla, possessed minds that demanded action. They could no longer simply exist within the mist of Ginnungagap beside the immense giant Ymir. The gods' decision was harsh and final. To create something new, they committed the first murder in history. Odin and his brothers attacked the giant when he did not expect any threat. This moment became a turning point in all mythology. Violence here was not an act of blind cruelty. It became a conscious instrument of creation. The gods committed a crime in order to extract order from chaos. When the giant's body fell, an event of unimaginable scale occurred. So much blood poured from his wounds that it became a vast ocean. The flood was so powerful that nearly all of the primordial giants drowned within it. Only one survived, along with his family, to continue the race of giants in the future. The blood of the giant became the foundation of all the waters of the world. It filled the abyss of Ginnungagap, forming seas and rivers that surrounded the future Earth. In this act, biological matter transformed into geography. The death of one being gave life to an entire ecosystem. But the gods did not stop there. They began the meticulous work of transforming Ymir's remains. Every part of the giant's body found its purpose in the construction of a new reality. This was a great redistribution of energy, where chaotic flesh became ordered matter. The gods turned the giant's flesh into land. From his bones they raised high mountains, barriers against wind and water. His teeth and shattered bone fragments became stones and boulders scattered across the land. Thus, solid ground was formed, a surface upon which one could walk. The gods acted like architects, using old material to build a monumental structure. His hair grew into forests and grasses, filling the land with vegetation. Every detail of the landscape carries within it a fragment of that first being. The earth gained density and relief, no longer a shifting mass of mist and ice. Special attention was given to the creation of the sky. The gods took the giant's skull and raised it high above the land, fixing it at four corners. The skull became a dome, separating the lower worlds from the higher realms. To keep the sky from collapsing, the gods placed a dwarf beneath each corner. Their names were East, West, North, and South. Thus, direction and orientation appeared in the world for the first time. The sky ceased to be emptiness, it gained boundaries and support. After this, the gods gathered the sparks flying from Muspelheim and fixed them to the inner side of the skull. Thus, the stars ignited in the sky, the first markers of time and direction. The giant's brain was thrown into the air, forming heavy clouds. From that moment, weather entered the world. Rain, fog, and storm clouds became reminders of the psychic energy that once lived in the mind of the first giant. The world began to breathe, air filled with moisture and motion. The universe now consisted of clear elements, salty seas, solid land, towering mountains, and cloudy sky. The chaos of Ginnungagap was finally defeated by physical form. Yet, it is important to remember,
This harmony was created from a murdered being. The world we live in is, in essence, a graveyard. Within this act lies a deep truth. Order is inherently fragile. It was established through violence and death. The world did not arise from love or harmony. It was torn from chaos by force. Every rock and every bay carries the memory of that murder. That is why balance in the Norse universe always demands effort to be maintained. From the very first day of the cosmos, a gulf of hostility lay between gods and giants. The giants who survived never forgot that their ancestor was dismembered to create a world ruled by gods. This primordial fracture in the foundation of existence will endure until the end of time. Creation from Ymir's body gave the world structure, but it also created a debt. The gods became masters of the world, but also its prisoners. For now, they had to protect this order from a return to chaos. The land was surrounded by an ocean, and beyond it lay the realms of the giants. They looked upon Odin's creation with hatred. The world became a battlefield of meanings even before the first humans appeared. The order established by Odin, Vili, and Ve was magnificent, yet forever stained with the blood of its material. The first gods finished their work and looked upon the universe they had created. Matter now obeyed their will. They separated salt from fresh, high from low, solid from soft. The world gained boundaries. Yet, within these boundaries, there were still no laws, no dwellings, no defined roles. The universe was ready to be inhabited, but remained empty in a social and spiritual sense. The creation of the physical world was complete, and the time had come to establish the great laws by which this world would continue to exist. On the horizon, the first sun was already rising, and in Odin's thoughts, plans were forming for the construction of Asgard, the dwelling destined to become the heart of this new cosmos, forged from the flesh of a giant.
After the physical world had been created, a new challenge stood before the gods. The vast expanse of land, sky, and sea required governance and clear structure. It was not enough to create matter. It had to be filled with meaning and law. Odin and his brothers understood that without a single center of control, the world would quickly return to primordial chaos. Thus began the construction of Asgard, the celestial city that became the heart of the entire universe. This place was not merely a fortress. It became a symbol of the victory of reason over raw force. Asgard rose above all other realms, embodying the idea of higher order and eternal vigilance. From here, the gods could observe everything that took place within creation. At the center of the city, they raised sanctuaries and halls of council where the fate of the world was debated. The most magnificent among them was Odin's hall, from which all 9 worlds could be seen. The construction of Asgard marked the end of wandering. The gods had found their home and their citadel. From that moment, the universe ceased to be a collection of scattered elements. It became a hierarchical system where every level occupied its strictly defined place. At the summit of this system stood the Aesir, who assumed responsibility for maintaining balance throughout the cosmos. The structure of the world took the form of 9 separate realms, connected yet divided by insurmountable boundaries. At the center lay Midgard, the middle world, destined for humanity. Around it stretched the realms of giants, the realms of light, and the realms of darkness. The gods drew clear lines between these spaces. They created the bridge Bifrost, connecting heaven and earth. but this bridge was protected by magic and by guardians. The separation of worlds was necessary so that different forms of existence would not collide in destructive conflict. Each realm received its ruler and its laws. This division of roles became the foundation of cosmic stability. But order required more than physical boundaries. It required moral obligations. The gods began to forge the first agreements among themselves and with other beings. This was the age of great assemblies known as things. At these councils, the Aesir established laws, determined punishments, and distributed duties. Odin became the supreme ruler, but his power was not an absolute tyranny. It rested on wisdom and on agreement with the other gods. Each of the Aesir received their sphere of influence. Some governed justice, some guarded fertility, others mastered the art of war. The hierarchy was constructed so that no part of the system could exist without the others. The world of that era rested on the sacred power of unbroken oaths. Agreements were made not only with allies, but also with potential enemies. The gods understood that their strength was great, yet limited by the laws of nature itself. To prevent endless wars with the giants, the Aesir entered negotiations, exchanged gifts, and traded hostages. This period can be called the Age of Great Diplomatic Balance. Every action of god or giant had to conform to established rules. The world ceased to be an arena of random clashes. Now every event carried legal and ethical consequences. The order created by the gods was meant to preserve what had been built from Ymir's body. The Aesir raised forges where wondrous objects were crafted. They established a calendar allowing time to be measured. They gave names to the stars and set the paths of the sun and the moon. Before this, the celestial lights knew neither direction nor purpose. Now day followed night, and winter followed summer in strict sequence. This cyclical time became the gods' greatest achievement, for it gave the world predictability. Living beings could plan their future, knowing that the laws of nature were unchanging. Yet this stability had a price. A world built on agreements demands constant vigilance. Any broken oath could lead to catastrophe. The gods spent great effort ensuring that boundaries were respected. Asgard was protected by mighty walls, but its true defense was the Aesir's loyalty to their oaths. In this golden age of order, it seemed the universe would exist forever in harmony. The gods reveled in their greatness, feasted in their halls, and believed the system they created was perfect. They saw no flaws in their laws, for they themselves were their creators. The order of the Aesir was deeply social. It was not merely the organization of matter, but the organization of relations. The gods established customs of hospitality, rules for resolving disputes, and rituals honoring elders. The entire cosmos became a reflection of an ideal society as envisioned by Odin and his brothers. The world gained structure not only in space, but in consciousness. Every being now knew its place and its rights. The giants remained in their icy and stony wastelands. The dwarves labored deep within the earth, and the gods ruled from the heights of Asgard. Thus ended the formation of the great system of 9 worlds. The gods fulfilled their mission, transforming chaos into civilization. They built a city, established hierarchy, and created laws meant to protect life. The world became comprehensible, logical, and secure. Peace reigned in Asgard, and at the councils of the gods a solution could always be found. It seemed the age of anxiety had been left forever behind in the mists of Ginnungagap.
But within the nature of this rigid system, the seeds of future change were already growing. For order taken to its absolute often fails to notice forces that do not fit within its strict boundaries. While the gods celebrated their victory over chaos, the borders of their world were already preparing to be crossed by those who recognized no treaties at all.
When Asgard was completed and the laws of the 9 worlds were established, it seemed the system had reached perfection. Yet any order deprived of movement and change risks becoming lifeless. It was at this moment that a figure entered the circle of the Aesir, one who fit into no hierarchy, yet became a crucial element of the universe. This was Loki. His appearance among the gods was not accidental. It was a necessity so that the world would not freeze in flawless stillness. Loki brought with him an energy that could not be foreseen in Odin's treaties and oaths. Loki's origin always raised questions among those accustomed to clear bloodlines. He was the son of Farbauti and Laufey. By blood, he belonged to the ancient enemies of the gods, to very forces of chaos Odin sought to restrain. Yet Loki was unlike other giants. He possessed a sharp mind, cunning, and the ability to change his form. These qualities allowed him to become Odin's blood brother. In ancient times, they mixed their blood, making Loki equal to the Aesir by the right of alliance, if not by birth. This alliance was strange, but it reflected a deep need within the gods, a connection to what lay beyond their understanding. Loki's place among the gods was always ambiguous. He lived in Asgard, feasted at the same table as Thor and Odin, and took part in councils, yet he was never entirely one of them. Loki occupied the position of an outsider within the system. He was the one who could speak truth when others remained silent, the one who saw the weaknesses in divine law. The gods often despised him for his deceit and inconsistency, yet they constantly needed his help. Without Loki, life in Asgard would have been predictable and dull, and many problems would have remained unsolved. Loki's role in cosmic history can be defined as useful chaos. Often it was his antics that placed the gods in dangerous situations. But it was precisely through his cunning that they emerged with even greater benefit. One may recall the construction of Asgard's walls when the gods risked losing the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya. It was Loki who devised the plan to deceive the giant builder and complete the wall without paying the promised price. As a result of this adventure, the gods not only kept their treasures, but also gained the 8-legged horse Sleipnir, which Odin would ride. Many of the gods' greatest treasures appeared because of Loki's actions. Thor's hammer, Sif's golden hair, the ship Skidbladnir, and Odin's spear were all born from his intrigues and quarrels with the dwarven smiths. Loki acted as a catalyst for change. He disrupted the usual order, provoked crises, and then found ways to overcome them. In this way, he constantly renewed the world, forcing the gods to act, adapt, and grow stronger. His presence ensured that the system remained alive and dynamic. Order functioned precisely because within it existed an element that constantly challenged it. Transgressing boundaries became Loki's way of being. He moved freely between the worlds of gods, giants, and humans. There were no forbidden zones for him.
Where other Aesir saw impenetrable walls and sacred treaties, Loki saw opportunities for play. He constantly tested the strength of Odin's rules. This violation of boundaries was a necessary part of the system. It allowed the gods to learn what happened beyond their fortresses. Loki became the eyes and ears of Asgard in places where the proud Aesir would never descend. Yet Loki's behavior always balanced at the edge of what was permitted. His jokes often turned into mockery, and his help always carried risk. The gods tolerated him because they understood Loki was the reverse side of their own power. If Odin embodied state wisdom and magic, then Loki embodied elemental cunning and the volatility of life itself. As long as his actions caused no irreversible harm, he remained a valuable ally. He was the instrument that allowed the Aesir to solve problems requiring moral flexibility and unconventional thinking. The world of that era can be imagined as a complex mechanism. The Aesir were the main components, and Loki was the lubricant that kept the gears from jamming. His instability was the guarantee of the longevity of divine order. During this period, Loki was not yet seen as the embodiment of evil. He was a trickster whose motives were unclear, but whose usefulness was undeniable. The gods laughed at his jokes, even when those jokes left a bitter aftertaste. In Asgard, it was still summer, and no one could imagine that this very element of the system would one day become the cause of its destruction. Loki's presence marked the transition from static stability to dynamic development. Odin's order was complemented by Loki's chaos. This created a unique balance that allowed the 9 worlds to flourish for a long time. The gods grew accustomed to relying on the luck and ingenuity of their strange companion. But Loki was not someone who could be controlled forever. His nature, rooted in ancient ice and fire, would sooner or later reveal itself in a new, terrifying form. For now, the borders stood firm, and Loki continued his endless wanderings, binding together incompatible parts of the universe and sustaining life within the great organism of the cosmos. For a time, Loki's presence in Asgard was seen by the gods as an irritating yet tolerable necessity. But the nature of chaos which he embodied could not be confined to mere personal mischief. In secret from the Aesir, Loki spent time in Jotunheim, the land of giants, with the giantess Angrboda. From this union, 3 beings were born, creatures that would forever change the climate of security in the 9 worlds. These were not ordinary children. In their forms and in their essence, everything primordial that the gods had tried to banish at the dawn of time manifested itself. Their birth became the first signal that Odin's order was not final. The first child was the wolf Fenrir. He possessed unimaginable strength and grew so rapidly that his size soon terrified the inhabitants of the heavenly city. The second child was Jormungandr, the serpent whose body was saturated with venom. The third was the daughter Hel. Her body and face were split in 2. One half was alive and healthy, the other was blue and dead. When the gods learned of their existence, dark rumors spread through Asgard. Seeresses and ancient prophecies spoke of one thing: these children would bring about the destruction of the gods and undo everything that had been created. This was the first time in history that the Aesir experienced true, paralyzing fear of the future. They feared not what had already happened, but what was yet to come. Odin, striving to preserve the stability of the world, chose to act preemptively. He ordered Loki's children to be brought to Asgard so that their fate could be decided. The gods hoped that control over these beings would help avert the prophesied catastrophe. But when they saw them with their own eyes, the Aesir understood the prophecies had solid ground. Odin decided to banish Jormungandr immediately. He cast the serpent into the deep ocean surrounding Midgard. The serpent fell for so long that he grew to colossal size. He settled on the ocean floor and encircled the entire world, biting his own tail. Thus the gods created a ring around their world, hoping the serpent would remain there forever. Hel's fate was decided differently. Odin sent her to the deep underground in the far north, appointing her the ruler of the realm of the dead. She was tasked with receiving those who died not in battle, but of old age or sickness. Thus the realm of Niflhel came into being. Hel's exile created a clear boundary between life and final departure. Yet, at the same time, the gods granted their enemy power over countless souls. Hel accepted her role in silence, arranging her cold and gloomy domain, while the gods above believed they had secured themselves. The greatest problem remained Fenrir. The gods kept him in Asgard, hoping to tame him. Only Tyr, the god of valor, dared to feed the beast, but the wolf continued to grow, becoming ever more ferocious. The prophecies declared that Fenrir would be the cause of Odin's death. Understanding that simple exile would not suffice, the Aesir decided to bind the wolf. Twice they forged mighty chains, and twice Fenrir shattered them with ease, proving his superiority over the gods' physical restraints. Then the gods turned to the dwarven masters, who forged Gleipnir, a binding made from intangible things, the sound of footsteps, a woman's beard, the roots of mountains, the breath of fish. To place it upon the wolf, the gods resorted to deceit. They offered Fenrir one final test of strength, promising it was only a game. Sensing betrayal, the wolf demanded that one of the gods place a hand in his jaws as a pledge of honesty. Only Tyr was willing to sacrifice himself for the common good. When Fenrir realized he could not break the magical bonds, he closed his jaws, and Tyr lost his hand. The wolf was bound and taken to a desolate island. He was chained to a rock, and a sword was wedged into his mouth so that he could not bite. The gods laughed, gazing upon their helpless enemy, but the laughter was strained. They knew they had bought time at the price of betrayal and the maiming of one of their noblest warriors. These events forever changed the atmosphere of the Nine Worlds. The age of carefree creation had ended. From now on, every step of the gods was driven not only by the desire to create, but the need to defend. The exile and binding of Loki's children did not solve the problem, it merely postponed it. The enemies of the gods were no longer forces of nature alone. They were wounded, humiliated beings waiting in the shadows for their hour. Loki, witnessing the fate of his children, harbored deep resentment. His bond with the Aesir became formal, and bitterness settled in his heart, a bitterness that would later turn against all of Asgard. The world entered a state of awaiting catastrophe. It was a strange time when outwardly everything remained the same. The sun still shone, the gods still feasted, humans in Midgard still tilled the soil. Yet the knowledge that somewhere in the ocean the world serpent was growing, and on a distant island a giant wolf strained against his bonds, poisoned the joy of existence. The gods became prisoners of their own prophecies. They tried to prevent the finale, but with every action only made it more inevitable. The binding of Fenrir became the symbol of an order now sustained by fear and violence. This was an age of hidden anxiety. The gods realized that the cosmos they had created was not a perpetual machine. Irremovable flaws had appeared in the system. Fear of the future became Odin's constant companion. He began gathering in Asgard the souls of fallen warriors, preparing for a battle that everyone knew was coming, but no one dared to name out loud. The birth of Loki's children marked the loss of the world's innocence. Safety gave way to paranoia. Trust was replaced by cold calculation. The world entered the slow maturation of the finale foretold at the very beginning, and no magical chains could stop the flow of time, drawing ever closer the great winter.
After Loki's children were banished and bound, a long silence settled over the 9 worlds. This period entered history as the Golden Age of Asgard. It was a time when the gods reached the peak of their power and prosperity. The walls of the heavenly city stood unbroken. Enemies were subdued, and the halls of the Aesir overflowed with treasures and feasts. On the surface, everything appeared perfect. The gods existed in an eternal youth. Their strength seemed limitless, their authority unquestionable. Yet it was precisely at this moment that beneath the facade of universal well-being, the first signs of a deep inner crisis began to emerge. The order established by Odin slowly began to erode from within, eaten away by pride and self-satisfaction. Youth and physical strength became the gods' greatest pride. In Asgard, there was no illness and no natural decay. The Aesir spent their days in contests, throwing spears, wrestling, testing their might. Thor was unmatched in strength, Odin in wisdom, Freya in beauty. It was an age when the gods believed in their own exclusivity and immortality. They looked down upon Midgard and the other worlds from the height of their greatness, convinced that their rule would last forever. Yet this confidence rested not in their own nature, but in an external source, one that required constant maintenance. This source was the golden apples of the goddess Idun. Within them lay the secret of the Aesir's eternal youth. Whenever the gods felt fatigue approaching or noticed the first traces of time, they came to Idun. She kept her fruit in a wondrous casket, and a single bite was enough to restore vigor and freshness. Idun's apples created the illusion of eternity. The gods lived in an artificially sustained state, cut off from the natural flow of existence. It was a fragile dependency. Once, Loki had already allowed a giant to kidnap Idun along with her fruit, and the moment she was gone, the Aesir began to age and weaken. Though the goddess was eventually returned, this incident revealed just how vulnerable their immortality truly was. Yet the Aesir chose to forget this lesson. They continued to enjoy Idun's gifts as if they were theirs by birthright. The Golden Age was accompanied by endless feasts in the halls of Asgard. Music never ceased, and mead flowed like rivers. But the atmosphere of these celebrations began to change. Where once the gods gathered to discuss the fate of the worlds and strengthen alliances, feasts now increasingly turned into contests of boasting. The gods mocked the giants, mocked humans, even mocked one another. The mutual respect that once formed the foundation of their unity gave way to arrogance. Loki, who was always present at these feasts, perceived these changes more sharply than anyone else.
His mockery grew increasingly venomous and cruel because he saw hypocrisy where others saw greatness. The culmination of this inner decay came with open accusations. Loki stopped hiding his true thoughts and began to speak out loud what others feared to even think. He accused the gods of past mistakes, of broken oaths, and of the fact that their power rested on deception and violence. He accused the Aesir of cowardice and infidelity, tearing the masks from their heroes. But the gods did not wish to hear these truths. They preferred to see Loki as a mad liar whose words carried no weight. Instead of reflecting on the state of their world, the Aesir turned their anger on the one who revealed their flaws. This refusal to face reality became the greatest crack in the foundation of Asgard. The truth, which no one wished to hear, was simple. The Golden Age had reached its logical end. The system created by Odin had exhausted its capacity for growth and begun to stagnate. The gods grew accustomed to comfort and safety. They lost touch with reality, replacing it with rituals and endless feasts. Cracks in the order of the Aesir grew ever wider, and no magic could seal them. Everything was ready for a great tragedy. The world froze in anticipation of an event that would destroy the last pillar of their stability. And that event did not delay, beginning with the moment when the most beautiful and beloved of the gods saw his first terrible dream. The Golden Age ended not by the strike of a sword, but by the realization that perfection cannot be preserved by force. After a long period of outward prosperity, Asgard faced an event that could not be prevented by weapons or by the cunning of laws. It began when Baldr, the son of Odin and Frigg, the most beautiful and beloved of all the Aesir, began to see troubling dreams. Baldr embodied purity, light, and justice. His presence among the gods was the guarantee that the world still preserved its original beauty and hope. Yet his visions were filled with darkness and the premonition of imminent death. These dreams became the first serious blow to the gods' confidence. When Baldr shared his forebodings with the other Aesir, anxiety spread through Asgard, an anxiety no feast or song could silence. Odin, troubled by his son's fate, set out on a long journey to the borders of the realm of the dead, seeking truth from an ancient seeress. The knowledge he gained offered no comfort. A place for Baldr was already been prepared in hell. Upon his return, Odin shared this news with Frigg. Baldr's mother decided to act. She undertook an unprecedented attempt to protect perfection itself. Frigg traveled through all 9 worlds, extracting an oath from every being, object, and element. Fire and water, iron and stone, trees, diseases, and beasts. All swore never to harm her son. Frigg believed she had created an absolute shield around Baldr, rendering him invulnerable to all danger. When the oaths were gathered, the gods of Asgard held a celebration that gradually turned into a strange game. They placed Baldr at the center of a circle and hurled stones, swords, and axes at him. Every object bounced away, leaving not a single mark. The spectacle filled the gods with joy and triumph. It seemed to them they had finally defeated fate itself. Baldr's invulnerability became a symbol of the eternity of their own rule. They laughed as the sharpest steel fell harmlessly at the feet of the shining god. In this revelry, they failed to notice how joy transformed into dangerous pride. Loki, whose heart by that time had been fully poisoned by bitterness, did not share their delight. He saw in Baldr's invulnerability a violation of the natural order. Loki took the form of a woman and came to Frigg, seeking to learn whether anything in the world had been spared from giving an oath. In a moment of trust, Frigg confessed that only one thing had been overlooked. A small shoot of mistletoe had seemed to her too young and insignificant to demand a promise. This confession became the key to the coming catastrophe. Loki found the mistletoe, cut it, and fashioned a thin dart from it. It was not a mighty weapon. It was merely a fragile twig, yet one with lethal power, because it alone had sworn no oath. Returning to the field where the gods continued their game, Loki approached Hoder, Baldr's blind brother. Hoder stood aside, unable to take part, for he could not see the target. Loki offered his help, saying it was unjust to leave a brother without a role in Baldr's celebration. He placed the mistletoe dart in Hoder's hand and guided his aim. The blind god hurled the twig with great force. The mistletoe pierced Baldr's chest, and the shining god fell dead in an instant. In that moment, Asgard sank into a silence beyond words. The world, which moments before had seemed eternal and protected, collapsed in a single heartbeat. Baldr's death was not an accident, though it was carried out by hands that bore no hatred. Loki had used blindness and trust to strike at the very heart of the system. This moment became the point of no return. Baldr's death meant there was no longer any place for absolute light and purity in the world. Evil had entered the very center of divine society. The gods tried to retrieve Baldr from the realm of the dead. Hel, ruler of the underworld, agreed to release him, but only if every living and dead being would weep for his loss. And once again, Loki, in the guise of a giantess, refused to shed a tear. With this refusal, Baldr's fate was sealed forever. Baldr's death set the mechanism of the end in motion. It shattered the moral authority of the gods. It signaled to all enemies of Asgard that the gods were vulnerable, and it finally split the Aesir, replacing wisdom and justice with rage, grief, and the thirst for vengeance. The murder of Baldr became the first act in the final drama of the cosmos. The world after Baldr's death was no longer the same. Colors faded, and a cold settled into the air, a cold that did not leave even in summer. The gods understood their golden age had ended forever. The prophecies of Ragnarok had begun to come to true, and the first sign was the loss of innocence. Baldr's death proved that no oath can save a world from corruption born within. From that moment on, the gods lived not in a world of creation, but in a world slowly dying. Every instant after the throw of that mistletoe dart brought them closer to the final battle. The tragedy of Baldr became the seed from which the great winter would grow, a winter destined to destroy all life.
After Baldr's death and the failure to return him from the realm of the dead, Asgard ceased to be a place of joy. The gods finally realized that Loki had crossed a line beyond which his presence among the Aesir was no longer possible. The trickster's guilt was proven, and his blood brotherhood with Odin could no longer protect him. Loki tried to flee, taking the form of a salmon and hiding in distant waterfalls. But the wisdom of Odin and the strength of Thor were insurmountable. He was captured. This moment marked the final rupture between the forces of order and the chaos the gods had long tried to tame. The punishment prepared for Loki was unprecedented in its cruelty. He was brought into a dark cave where he was destined to remain until the very end of the world. The gods used the entrails of his own children to bind him to 3 jagged stones. These bindings miraculously turned into iron that could never be broken. Above his face they placed a venomous serpent from whose fangs burning poison dripped endlessly. Each drop, striking Loki's skin, caused unbearable pain. His screams made the earth itself tremble. In Midgard, humans called these convulsions earthquakes. In this punishment, the gods poured out all their rage and all their helplessness before the coming fate. Yet even in this darkness, there remained a place for loyalty the gods could not understand. Loki's wife, Sigyn, did not abandon him in his fall. She stood beside him, holding a bowl above his face to catch the serpent's poison. For countless ages she remained motionless, embodying silent compassion. Only when the bowl filled to the brim did Sigyn step away to empty it. In those brief moments, the poison again burned Loki's face, and the world shook with his agony. Sigyn's compassion was the only glimmer of light in the grim vision of the world's end. It reminded all that even in a universe doomed to destruction, deep personal bonds still endure. While Loki suffered in the depths, the world above began to change rapidly. The collapse of bonds between the gods became undeniable. The former unity of the Aesir, which had allowed them to build the 9 worlds, vanished. Trust was broken forever. The gods grew suspicious and grim. They no longer gathered for joyful feasts. Their councils in Asgard became brief and filled with bitterness. Each of them understood that the end was near, and this knowledge poisoned every endeavor. The gods became prisoners of their fear, spending their days reinforcing walls that were doomed to fall. This era entered legend as the age of painful waiting. It was a time when the world continued to exist by inertia, fully aware of its inevitable end. In Midgard, humans began to notice that the laws of nature no longer worked as they before. Moral foundations collapsed. Brother rose against brother. Children ceased to honor their parents. Orths lost their power. Greed and violence became the only measures of success. The social order, once a mirror of divine order, crumbled before human eyes. The universe entered a moral winter, preceding the physical one. The climate of the 9 worlds began to change. Summer no longer brought warmth. Autumn passed directly into bitter frost. The sun no longer brought joy. It appeared dull and lifeless. Fimbulwinter approached, the great winter destined to last 3 unbroken years. Snow fell from all 4 directions. Icy winds pierced every wall. Fear of cold and hunger became the dominant feeling of all living beings. This winter was not as a season, but as a state of existence, denying growth and renewal. The loss of a future became the greatest tragedy of this age. Where once gods and humans built temples and planted gardens, hoping for future harvests, all meaning was now lost. All energy of the worlds was spent merely on survival. Creation gave way to paralysis. Odin continued to gather warriors in Valhalla, preparing for the final battle. Yet even in these preparations, there was no joy of victory. The world froze in a deathly spasm.
bound in chains, Loki waited for his hour. Sigyn still held the bowl, and the gods on the heights of Asgard gazed at the fading stars. All great treaties were forgotten, all treasures lost their value. In the silence of the great winter, only the crunch of ice could be heard, and the howling of wolves chasing the sun and the moon. This age of waiting was necessary for the world to accept the inevitability of change. The old order had to fully exhaust itself to make room for something else. But before that moment, all beings would have to endure the greatest trial in the history of the cosmos, where fear would be their only companion in the coming darkness.
When 3 years of the great winter finally exhausted the land and broke the spirit of humankind, the time of the final signs arrived. The world, forged from the flesh and blood of the primordial giant, could no longer hold its boundaries. The heavenly wolves, who for ages had chased the celestial lights, finally caught their prey. One wolf devoured the sun, the other swallowed the moon, and utter darkness fell upon all 9 worlds. Stars began to fall from the sky, unable to cling to the giant's skull, which trembled beneath the rage of the advancing chaos. The earth shook so violently that mountains collapsed, and all bonds forged by the gods snapped like fragile threads. In that moment, Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, broke free from his magical chains. His jaws opened so wide that his lower jaw scraped the earth while the upper touched the sky. The world serpent, Jormungandr, rose in fury from the ocean depths, unleashing colossal waves that drowned what remained of Midgard. From the realm of the dead sailed the ship Naglfar, built from the nails of the deceased, commanded by the giant Hrym. At last, Loki, freed from his torment, led the armies of Shadow. From the south came the sons of Muspelheim, led by Surtur, whose flaming sword shone brighter than the lost sun itself. Beneath the weight of this host, the rainbow bridge Bigfrost collapsed, severing Asgard from all other worlds. The gods heard the horn of Heimdall. He sounded Gjallarhorn for the final time, summoning all beings to the last battle. Odin, clad in a golden helm, led the Einherjar on to the plain of Vigrid. This was not a battle to save the world. All knew the world was already doomed. It was a battle for dignity and for the completion of a destined path. Each of the gods met their ancient enemy. Thor clashed with the world serpent. He struck it down with his hammer, but after taking only 9 steps, he fell dead, poisoned by its venomous breath. Odin fought Fenrir and was devoured, fulfilling the prophecies he had long sought to escape. Tyr fell to the hound Garm. Freyr died by Surtur's hand, and Loki and Heimdall slew one another in their final duel. When the great defenders of order had fallen, Surtur hurled his flames upon the world. The cosmos ignited. The fire of Muspelheim consumed the remnants of Asgard, the forests of Midgard, and the frozen wastes of the north. The sky folded inward. The earth sank into boiling ocean waters. Time stopped. Space returned to what it had been before the dawn of ages, a silent, dark void. The order built on violence and oaths ceased to exist, returning to its primordial state. This end was natural and necessary. Ragnarok was not a random catastrophe. It was a cleansing fire, burning away exhausted bonds and impossible obligations. The universe had to die to free itself from the weight of the past. Yet the Norse vision does not end in absolute emptiness. When Surtur's flames faded and the waters calmed, a new land rose from the sea. It was green, fresh, and fertile. Grain grew without being sown. Rivers ran with clear water. Above this world rose a new sun, born of the old before its destruction. In this silence, free of battle cries and clashing steel, rebirth began. From the ashes of the old world emerged those destined to become the seeds of new life. In the grove of Hodmimir, 2 humans survived, Lif and Lifthrasir. They fed of morning dew and endured the flames of Ragnarok. From them, a new human race would arise. In Asgard, where Odin's halls once stood, the surviving children of the gods gathered. Among them were Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin, and Magni and Modi, sons of Thor, inheritors of their father's strength. Most important of all was the return of Baldr and Hoda from the realm of the dead. Brothers once divided by tragedy and deception now sat together, ruling the new world in light and harmony. They found in the grass the golden game pieces with which the gods had played at the dawn of time. These relics symbolized continuity, but without the old obsession with controlling fate. A new order was built on different foundations. There was no place for cruel sacrifices or clever intrigues. It was a chance to begin again, wiser and unburdened by the past. Silence reigned, not emptiness, but a deep breath of relief. The universe entered a new cycle, and in this endless turning of ages lies the true mystery of existence, where every ending carries within it the seed of a future dawn.